Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for that very kind gesture. And I want to thank Dr. Levin for his warm words and for this extraordinary award. I also want to thank Dr. Arnold Gold and his wonderful wife, Dr. Sandra Gold. I had the privilege of speaking to them for just a short few minutes earlier this evening. And you don't have to speak to them very long to feel the empathy and the kindness that radiates from them. That comes from such a deep place. And I know many of you have felt that. And I feel very honored that I had the chance to feel that too tonight. I want to thank the Board of Trustees of the Foundation for this award, and also want to congratulate Dr. Jordan Cohen, not only for the award, but for his many, many years of distinguished service to our profession and to the country. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. You know, as I was coming over here today, I was reflecting on a number of things, but perhaps the most important was my parents. I just came earlier, I came here from an engagement earlier today, which was in Jackson Heights, where I was with Congressman Crowley in the heart of, as we think of it, South Asian America here in New York. And it brought back these memories of trips I used to make when I was a child with my parents to Jackson Heights. This was back in the days where there weren't too many Indian grocery stores in Miami where we lived. And so whenever there was a chance to come to Jackson Heights and stock up on dal and other sort of staples of Indian cooking, we took that opportunity, often with a suitcase in hand. And I was thinking of them today as I was walking along those same streets that I walked when I was a little boy. And one of the things that my parents did for me, of the many things, is they inspired me to go into medicine. And they did that not by telling me it's a great profession, but by the strength of their example. My dad is a family physician. My mother has no training in medicine, but somehow has managed to learn quite a lot of medicine over the years. In fact, she delights in making surprise diagnoses when nobody thinks she's listening. And she's often right. But the two of them built a medical practice in Miami when I was young. And as a young child, along with my sister, used to spend a lot of time in that clinic, helping out, sorting papers, opening mail, greeting patients as they came and went, cleaning the office afterward. It really was the family business. But along the way, what I didn't expect was the fascination that came with seeing what I saw transpire each day in that office. And I was too young to understand the science, but I was not too young to understand that there was compassion that was flowing both ways between my parents and their patients, and from their patients to them. And that beautiful example of building relationships with people, relationships that were based on trust, that became my definition of medicine. That's what I wanted to be a part of when I grew up. That's ultimately why I became a doctor. And I think about that often because I think sometimes as we get older, life becomes unnecessarily complicated. We are often born, I think, with the right inclinations, with the right inherent values, but somehow they get clouded over time by experiences that we have that teach us or lead us to believe that our values might be different than what they really are. That teach us to believe that it's not always as simple as doing the right thing, but you have to weigh the pros and cons, that you have to think about the politics, that you have to consider how it may affect your future. And all of that gets in the way of us being who we really are. And so those basic lessons that my parents taught me very young, I tend to remember. And I remembered them when I entered medicine for the first time, and I began to realize that that beautiful picture I had of medicine, of the relationships that were built between my parents and their patients, seemed somehow more distant and complicated. Instead of spending all that time with patients, I found myself going through reams and reams of medical records, trying to piece together who this patient was. Sometimes even losing sight of the fact that perhaps the most important part of who they were might be found in a conversation with them and not in dense charts and files. I also found myself spending more and more time in a culture that seemed to tell us that strength was defined by the length of your workday and not by the size of your heart. And that was very striking to me, unexpected, but powerful as well. And we know that medicine has a very powerful culture, which is why I think the Gold Foundation's white coat ceremony, inspired by Arnold and Sandra Gold, is such a stroke of genius. I went through that white coat ceremony myself when I was in medical school. And that kind of affirmation of values is what we have to keep doing early, because it's not actually about teaching medical students what values they should have as physicians. It's about preventing them from losing the values that they already have. And I often tell medical students and residents that the ingredients that are most important to being a good doctor are the ones that they already came with, that they didn't need a cell biology class to learn, the values of compassion and empathy. I think about this not just in my own experience, but also when I see the news that tells us about rising rates of depression among our medical residents. Our medical residents have a depression rate that is 4 times that of the average population. We have a suicide rate among physicians which is extraordinarily high, and we lose hundreds and hundreds of physicians every year to suicide. And what this has led to is a sense of burnout in our profession. And part of that has been a disconnectedness that we have felt, a disconnectedness from patients, from our mission, and even at times from each other. And this disconnectedness is also known as isolation. When I was in residency, people would often ask me, Vivek, what's the most common thing you see? Is it diabetes? Is it cancer? What is it? And I often tell them the most common thing I see is none of those. The most common thing I see is isolation. It's an isolation that stems from a lack of meaning and from a lack of self-worth. And we've seen that our profession is not immune to that. And there's great irony here, because at the same time we live in the most connected of times, but also the least connected of times. We live in a time where people have thousands of friends on Facebook, thousands of followers on Twitter, in some cases millions of followers on Twitter. We live in a time where people live in densely populated cities and in high-rise condo buildings where there could be thousands of residents just feet away from you. But despite all of that, we find what is becoming increasingly rare is true connection, the kind of connection that allows one to feel truly known, that allows you to feel truly seen, the kind of connection which allows you to understand others and to be understood in a deep way. You can't always get that from Facebook or from Twitter. But that kind of connection is becoming increasingly rare. And the challenge that is facing America right now is that the connections that hold together our diverse country are being tested. And in some cases, they're fraying. And in no small part, this is being driven by a culture that has focused excessively on conflict and seems to glorify conflict instead of celebrating collaboration. So the challenge is, how do we rebuild a more connected America? And I think that to do that, there are at least 3 things that we need. We certainly need more empathy, the ability to see ourselves in another. We certainly need more optimism, the ability to continue believing in others, even when they disappoint us from time to time, even if they disagree with us vehemently. And we need courage as well. Courage to act on that desire to build connection, even when it seems scary. And sometimes that opportunity is in the elevator, when we're with other people who we don't know, and everyone suddenly gets incredibly interested in the speck of dust on the ceiling. But it's in those small moments that connection is made, often not with words, but with a simple smile or with a glance. Some of these lessons, as I mentioned, we knew when we were young, but we have forgotten them with time. I remember a very poignant conversation I had with Mark Barden, an extraordinary leader, but also the father of a young boy who was killed in Newtown. And his son was named Daniel. Daniel's a young boy in elementary school who sadly lost his life the day of that tragic and horrific shooting. But what he told me about Daniel is he said Daniel had this gift. When he was in school, during lunchtime or on the playground, if he saw another child who was eating alone or just sitting alone, he would go up to that child and he would ask him or her how they were doing. Sometimes he would just sit there to provide them with company. He was probably only 6 years old. But that wisdom that he had is one that I think our entire country could benefit from. Again, knowledge that we had, wisdom that we were born with, but that we have often forgotten. If you think about empathy and optimism and courage, I believe that these are all manifestations of something deeper, a deeper root energy. And that energy is actually love. I've long believed that there are really only two forces that guide our actions in this world, and those are love and fear, and manifestations of them. Now, love sometimes manifests as compassion, as empathy, as optimism, as courage, as generosity. And fear has its many manifestations as well, as anger, as insecurity, as jealousy, and sometimes as outright fear. But our world right now is locked in a struggle between love and fear. And the question is, which way will the balance go? This question has taken on even deeper meaning for me in recent weeks. About 9 weeks ago, 9 weeks Thursday, my wife and I were blessed with a baby boy. And thank you. And I will tell you that long before he was born, but shortly after Alice, my wife and I, found out we were pregnant, we asked ourselves the question, what kind of world are we bringing our son into? And we asked this question in the wake of some of the many tragedies which have taken place over the last year. And while we can't predict the future, we knew that in that struggle between love and fear, that we had to do everything we could to make sure that the balance tipped towards love. Because that's what we want for our son, and that's what we want for all children. And so as I think about all of us together who are in this room, my ask of you is to put your thumb on the scale and to tip the balance towards love. And to do so through your thoughts, through your words, through your deeds, to do so at home, at work, and in your community, to do so when everyone is looking, but also to do so when no one is looking. And imagine what could happen if we create a world that is fueled by love. We would have a world where we gave people the benefit of the doubt. Imagine that. A world where we could actually truly talk to each other, even about things that we disagreed on. A world where people stepped up to help each other, even when it didn't seem like their immediate self-interest was at stake. We could create a world where we don't have to teach people how to be compassionate. We just need to prevent them from forgetting it. That's the kind of world that we can create, a world fueled by love, a world where we choose love over fear. And that, I believe, is the most important question, the most important challenge that faces our country and our world today. It's also why I am so grateful that the Gold Foundation is there to be a strong voice for love, not just in our profession, but in our practice as human beings, of interacting with each other and of contributing to society. So I want to thank Arnold and Sandra once again. I want to thank the board and the staff of the Gold Foundation for this wonderful recognition and this opportunity to be here with you. And I want to thank all of you for being a part of the struggle and for choosing to help us create a world that is founded in love, a world that we can create for our children, and a world that we can ultimately be most proud of. Thank you so much.